Eddie Howe has walked away from Newcastle United, not been sacked, not pushed out by poor results alone. He has made the decision himself after nearly 5 years in charge to step back and leave St James Park behind. And the timing of that decision is the part that should stop every Arsenal supporter in their tracks. Because this did not happen in isolation. This happened in the middle of one of the most sensitive transfer stories of the summer. Bruno Guimarães, Newcastle's own captain, the man Howe built his midfield around, is the same player Arsenal have been quietly and persistently pursuing for weeks. And now, within hours of Howe's departure becoming public, multiple voices close to the situation are pointing to the same explanation. Howe did not walk away because of one bad pre-season result. He walked away because he believed his own club was preparing to sell his captain to Arsenal, and he was not part of that decision. That is the moment we are stepping into today. A manager gone. A captain in limbo, and a North London club sitting right at the centre of it, watching a rival's dressing room start to fracture from the outside. Let me be clear about what was actually at risk here, because this is not a small story dressed up to sound big. This is a genuine structural moment for two clubs at once. For Newcastle, the stakes were enormous. Losing a manager who had spent 5 years building identity, trust, and a working relationship with his best player is not something a club recovers from in a single transfer window. If Bruno Guimarães leaves on top of that, Newcastle are not just losing a captain. They are losing the emotional spine of the team that Howe built, at the exact moment they no longer have the man who built it. For Arsenal, the stakes are different but just as real. A move for Bruno Guimarães was never going to be simple. Newcastle had been adamant, publicly and repeatedly, that their captain was not for sale. Eddie Howe himself had said he wanted to keep him. If Arsenal had pushed too hard, too publicly, and been rebuffed, it could have poisoned the relationship between the two clubs for future dealings. Instead, what appears to be unfolding is something far more significant. A manager's exit that may have removed the last line of internal resistance to a sale. And that is before we even get to Vinicius Jr., a completely separate storyline running in parallel, where Arsenal are positioning themselves for a scenario that depends entirely on what happens between a Brazilian forward and Real Madrid. A conversation Arsenal have no control over whatsoever. Before I break all of this down piece by piece, if you want the kind of analysis that separates confirmed fact from noise in every one of these transfer stories, this is exactly the channel for that. Hit subscribe now because we are about to go through everything in detail and I want you here for the next one too. Now let's get into it properly. The Howe exit, what is actually confirmed. Let's start with what we know for certain, because this is where accuracy matters most. Eddie Howe has informed Newcastle United of his decision to leave. According to David Ornstein's exclusive reporting, all parties at the club had initially intended to continue together. That is an important detail. This was not a foregone conclusion from the start of the summer. Howe himself informed the club of his decision to step away, and he will depart after 5 years as head coach. Ornstein's reporting also names Matthias Gisel, currently at Al Ahly, as the man being lined up to replace him. I want to be precise here. Gisel being lined up is reported, not confirmed as an appointment. So we treat that part as strongly sourced but not yet finalised. What is fully confirmed is this. Howe is gone. 48 years old, 5 years at the helm, and now stepping away from Newcastle United. One fan reaction that circulated alongside this news put it simply. Bruno was a matter of time, but this surely puts the nail in the coffin regarding his Newcastle future. That is not a confirmed transfer detail. That is a supporter's read on the situation, but it captures exactly the mood among Newcastle's own fan base in the hours after the news broke. The theory behind the exit. Now here is where I need to be very careful with you, because this next part is not confirmed fact. It is a theory, and a strong one, but it is still a theory. Newcastle supporters have connected Howe's departure directly to Bruno Guimarães. The logic being circulated is that Howe was told the club had effectively sanctioned the sale of his captain to Arsenal, and that this is what pushed him to leave. Multiple fan voices have echoed almost identical language. One described the timing as making no sense unless Bruno's departure was already decided internally. Another pointed to the fact that Bruno was due back for pre-season training and suggested Howe wanted the situation resolved before that return. A third suggested that even if Howe genuinely could not take the club further on the pitch, the manner of his exit, learning that his captain was being sold without his full involvement, is what actually tipped him over the edge. I want to be completely transparent with you. None of that is officially confirmed by Newcastle United. This is fan sentiment and informed speculation building around a real and confirmed event, which is Howe's exit. What gives the theory weight is a separate piece of reporting, and this is where it gets interesting, because it is not just fans saying this anymore. One report attributed to Luke Edwards states plainly that Howe quit as Newcastle manager with immediate effect, and that the decision was taken because Howe believes the club will eventually sell Bruno Guimarães to Arsenal this summer. That is a significant escalation from fan theory to journalist reporting. It still sits in the category of reported rather than officially confirmed by the club itself, but it is no longer just supporters connecting dots. It is now being reported as the actual reason behind the decision. Bruno Guimarães, where the negotiation actually stands. This is the centerpiece of the entire story. So let's slow down and go through it properly, because the reporting on the fee has shifted multiple times in a short window, and you deserve to know exactly how it has moved. Bruno Guimarães remains, as of right now, a Newcastle United player. He is their captain. He has 2 years left on his contract. He turns 29 in November. None of that has changed. What has changed is the tone around whether he stays. Arsenal have been pushing to sign him for several weeks, and talks reportedly accelerated in recent days. Newcastle's initial public position was firm. Sources at the club insisted their captain was not for sale, and Howe himself said publicly that he wanted to keep him. That was the starting point. Then the picture started to move. One report described Bruno as understood to be frustrated after Newcastle rejected an Arsenal bid worth £75 million. The same report claimed Eddie Howe was among those most disappointed by that situation, and that he expressed his dissatisfaction to the club's hierarchy over how the entire Guimarães case was handled before his own departure. If that sequence is accurate, it tells you Howe's frustration with ownership over this specific issue predates his exit and may have directly contributed to it. From there, the reporting shifted again. A separate update indicated Arsenal are understood to be close to meeting Newcastle's valuation, with that figure sitting at around £80 million. The suggestion is that Arsenal have been working on the structure of the deal, using add-ons to bridge the gap between their original valuation and what Newcastle are demanding. Then, most recently, a breaking update claimed Arsenal are nearing an agreement with Newcastle for a fee expected to sit slightly above £70 million. That is noticeably below both the £75 million bid that was reportedly rejected and the £80 million figure mentioned elsewhere. So here is my honest read on this as an analyst. You have 3 different figures circulating within a short period: 75 million rejected, roughly 80 million as Newcastle's valuation, and slightly above 70 million as a reported breaking agreement. These numbers do not fully align with each other, and that inconsistency is normal in a live, fast-moving negotiation where multiple outlets are getting different pieces from different sources. What I will not do is pretend there is one single confirmed fee, because there is not. What I can tell you with confidence is the direction of travel. Every version of this story, regardless of the exact number, points the same way. Arsenal are closing in, and Newcastle appear increasingly willing to sell. One fan reaction to the reported fee compared it to other current midfield valuations in the market, naming figures like £116 million and £117 million for other players, and describing a fee just above 70 million for a player of Bruno's proven quality as excellent business if it happens at that number. Again, that is opinion and comparison, not confirmed fact, but it reflects why Arsenal fans are so engaged with this particular deal. My analysis here is simple. Whether the final number lands at 70 million, 75 million or 80 million, the story underneath is consistent. Newcastle's public resistance has clearly softened. Howe's departure, whatever the precise chain of causation, has removed a manager who was publicly committed to keeping his captain. And Bruno himself is reported to be frustrated with how his own club has handled the situation. Every one of those factors points toward an exit, even if the final figure is still being negotiated. There is also a human element to this that is worth slowing down on, because transfer coverage can sometimes reduce a situation like this to numbers alone, and that misses what is actually going on inside that dressing room. Bruno Guimarães is not a fringe player being quietly moved on. He is the captain. He is a proven top-level Brazilian central midfielder, and by his own club's actions over the last 2 years, one of the most important figures in that squad. When a captain of that stature is reported to be frustrated with a rejected bid, and the manager who built the team around him is reported to be equally frustrated with how the hierarchy handled it, that is not a small crack. That is the kind of disconnect between the coaching staff, the dressing room, and the ownership structure that tends to accelerate a transfer rather than slow it down. Once a captain starts to feel like the people running the club are negotiating his future without him, the relationship rarely recovers, regardless of what happens with this specific window. It is also worth stating plainly what this would mean for Arsenal if it is completed anywhere near the reported figures. A central midfielder of Bruno Guimarães' profile at his age, with 2 years remaining on his previous contract, and established as one of the best in his position in the Premier League, arriving for a fee in the region of £70 to £80 million, would represent exactly the kind of individual upgrade Arteta has been publicly describing all summer. It fits the stated aim of adding better individuals to elevate the existing group rather than simply adding squad depth. Vinicius Jr., a separate and more speculative story. Now I want to move to Vinicius Jr. because this needs to be handled with a different level of caution than the Bruno situation. This is a much earlier stage story and I want you to walk away from this video understanding exactly how early. Vinicius Jr. remains a Real Madrid player. That has not changed. What has changed is the contract picture between him and his current club. Reporting indicates he has rejected Real Madrid's first contract offer. That opening proposal was worth around €22 million per year plus 50% image rights. Vinicius is said to want closer to €25 million per year and 80% of his image rights, along with a significant signing bonus reported to be worth up to €25 million. Arsenal are described as monitoring this situation. They are reportedly prepared to offer 100% image rights, a higher salary, and a total package that could reach £140 million. But here is the sentence that matters more than any of those numbers. Vinicius' stated priority is to stay at Real Madrid, but only if a new agreement can be reached. The final decision remains entirely with the player. Read that again, because it tells you everything about how realistic this scenario actually is right now. This is not Arsenal trying to convince Vinicius to leave a club he wants to leave. This is Arsenal positioning themselves for the possibility that contract talks between Vinicius and Real Madrid collapse. Two analysts discussing this exact situation described it as a puncher's chance for Arsenal, meaning a long shot that is not impossible but far from likely. Their reasoning was direct. Anyone treating this as more likely than not to happen was being overly optimistic, because Arsenal are, in their words, always the secondary element to this story. The primary story is entirely about whether Vinicius and Real Madrid can find common ground on his contract. If Vinicius simply agrees to a new deal in Madrid on his terms, this entire Arsenal conversation ends immediately. There is one genuine structural advantage worth highlighting, and it is the one piece of this story that is not just speculation. Image rights at Real Madrid are currently split 50-50 with the club. Due to differences in regulation between Spain and England, a move to Arsenal would allow Vinicius to keep 100% of his own image rights. That is a real tangible difference in how the two markets operate. And it is the one part of the Arsenal pitch that has actual substance behind it rather than just financial competition. My analysis is this. Treat the Vinicius story as exploratory interest tied to a contract negotiation Arsenal have zero control over. It is a real interest, reportedly approved internally at Arsenal, but it is not remotely close to the same stage as the Bruno Guimarães situation. One is an active negotiation with fee figures being reported. The other is a club positioning itself for a scenario that has not yet been triggered. I also want to flag something about the reported weekly wage figure, because it needs context rather than repetition. The suggestion that Vinicius could earn around £600,000 a week at Arsenal, inclusive of 100% image rights, is a striking number, and it is easy to let a figure like that dominate a headline. But that number only becomes relevant if the entire chain of events plays out first. Vinicius has to fail to reach acceptable terms with Real Madrid. Real Madrid then has to be willing to sell one of their most important attacking players rather than simply let the relationship sour and extend talks further. And Arsenal then have to be the club he chooses among any other suitors who would inevitably enter that conversation. Every one of those steps has to happen in sequence for the number to matter at all. Right now, none of them have happened. What has happened is a rejected opening contract offer, which is a normal part of almost any high-level contract negotiation, and not on its own, evidence that a move away is coming. The image rights differential is the one piece of substance in this story precisely because it does not depend on any of those steps happening first. It is simply a factual difference in how the two leagues and two clubs structure player compensation, and it explains why Arsenal see a genuine opening here even while acknowledging that Vinicius' own stated preference is to remain in Madrid. It gives Arsenal a real card to play if talks with Real Madrid do break down, rather than needing to convince him with wages alone. Squad changes already happening around this. While these two headline stories dominate attention, there are real, confirmed changes already taking place inside the Arsenal squad, and I do not want these to get lost. Leandro Trossard has left the club. Mikel Arteta publicly thanked him, describing their time together as an incredible journey and praising his contribution to both the team and the club as extraordinary. That departure is confirmed and finalised. In the same breath, Arteta pointed to Christos Tzolis as the player brought in to fill that gap, calling him a player and a personality that supporters will very rapidly fall in love with. So while one winger has departed, a replacement is already being positioned publicly by the manager himself. Away from the first team picture, there is confirmed change in the background staff as well. Antonio Gomez Perez has officially been confirmed as Arsenal's new head of performance. In his own words, he described himself as thrilled to begin a new chapter at the club, thanking the club's colleagues and players who had been part of his journey to this point, and calling it a new challenge at one of the biggest clubs in world football. Then there are two younger players whose futures are being discussed, and both of these situations are rumour and interest stage, not anything close to confirmed moves. Ethan Nwaneri, Arsenal's record-breaking academy product, has reportedly drawn contact from AC Milan, with inquiries also coming from RB Leipzig, Fulham and Everton. Arsenal are described as open to a permanent transfer and willing to listen to offers for him. That is interest and openness on Arsenal's side, not an agreed deal. Separately, Reiss Nelson has reportedly attracted long-standing interest from West Ham. The suggestion is that the 26-year-old is keen to stay in London and could like the idea of playing regular football, which would obviously not be guaranteed at Arsenal given the competition for places out wide. Again, this sits at the interest stage. Nothing here is agreed or confirmed. What happened to Newcastle's other departures? One detail that deserves attention, because it adds real context to how difficult Newcastle's summer has already been before Howe's exit even happened. Anthony Gordon and Sandro Tonali have both already left Newcastle. Arsenal had held interest in both players at earlier points, but were understood to have been unwilling to meet the financial demands attached to any potential deal for them. So Arsenal did not sign either of them. They simply left the club through other means. What this tells you is that Howe's departure is not happening in a vacuum. It is the third major exit from that dressing room in a short space of time, following two players Arsenal themselves had looked at and ultimately walked away from due to cost. The identity question at Arsenal. I want to close the deep dive with something slightly different, because it speaks to why all of this matters beyond the individual transfer numbers. Arsene Wenger recently reflected on Mikel Arteta, describing him as someone who was very conscious of the values of the club, in part because he was educated at Arsenal himself and served as captain under Wenger. According to Wenger, Arteta's motivation has consistently been to restore those values at the club he once played for. I think that context is genuinely useful when you look at everything else in this story. A manager who was shaped by this club's identity is now the one steering a summer that includes chasing a rival captain in Bruno Guimarães, pursuing one of the most sought-after forwards in world football in Vinicius Jr, restructuring the performance department with a new hire, and moving on a departing winger while integrating a new one in Tzolis. Arteta himself has been direct about the scale of ambition involved, stating plainly that the club understands it needs a better squad and better individuals to reach the level it is aiming for, and that concrete steps are coming soon. So let's bring this together clearly, because I want you to leave this video knowing exactly what is confirmed and what is not. Confirmed. Eddie Howe has left Newcastle United after 5 years. Leandro Trossard has left Arsenal. Christos Tzolis has arrived. Antonio Gomez Perez has been officially confirmed as Arsenal's new head of performance. Anthony Gordon and Sandro Tonali have already left Newcastle, without Arsenal completing deals for either of them. Strongly reported, but not yet officially finalised. Matthias Gisel being lined up as Newcastle's next manager. A fee for Bruno Guimarães, with reported figures ranging from just above £70 million to around £80 million, and Arsenal appearing to be closing in on an agreement with Newcastle. Theory and speculation. The specific claim that Howe's exit was directly triggered by a decision to sell Bruno Guimarães to Arsenal. This has moved from pure fan theory toward reported journalism, but it remains attributed reporting rather than an official statement from Newcastle United. Early stage interest, far from confirmed. Vinicius Jr to Arsenal, which depends entirely on the outcome of his separate contract negotiation with Real Madrid. Interest from AC Milan and other clubs in Ethan Nwaneri. Interest from West Ham in Reiss Nelson. That is the full picture, laid out honestly, with every piece of it separated by how solid the information actually is. This is a club moving on multiple fronts at once, some of it already done, some of it close, and some of it still entirely dependent on decisions being made at other clubs, decisions Arsenal cannot control. If this kind of clear, careful breakdown is what you want from Arsenal coverage, Subscribe to the channel and stay close over the coming days, because both the Bruno Guimarães situation and the Newcastle managerial appointment look like they are moving toward resolution very soon, and I will be here to break down exactly what is confirmed the moment it happens.